Was this week the week that Ukraine's long-awaited counteroffensive finally started? Russian President Vladimir Putin seemed to think so. Vladimir Putin said in a video interview published on Telegram that we can definitely say that this attack by Ukraine has begun. In fact, Ukraine had been on the offensive for weeks, carrying out what are known in military jargon as shaping operations. The advance of small detachments of lightly armored Ukrainian troops towards the Russian fortifications in southern Ukraine, southeast of Zaporizhia, seemed to herald a change. Sergei Kusin, co-founder and head of the Ukrainian Center for Security and Cooperation, stated that the combat reconnaissance phase was carried out along the entire front. This means that there is an investigation in the Russian defense. In addition, while the Ukrainian armed forces continued to advance on the southern front line, clashes flared up again on the eastern front line. The missiles, with a range of 250 kilometers delivered to Ukraine by the United Kingdom, greatly escalated the conflicts, especially in Luhansk. The other day, the Ukrainian armed forces struck Luhansk, which it temporarily occupied with Storm Shadow cruise missiles. In total, 6 explosions occurred in Luhansk as a result of the explosions. Huge gray smoke rose into the sky. The news of this attack was announced by the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine. Storm Shadow cruise missiles hit the areas of industrial enterprises such as the October Revolution factory, the Gloria Jeans factory, and the Luhansk to Central Cruise factory. Russian soldiers repair damaged military equipment at these enterprises. Also, in the past month, there have been many explosions in the city of Luhansk. Eyewitnesses claim that before the explosions, characteristic sounds similar to the one made by cruise missiles during flight were heard. Videos posted on social media showed a thick cloud of black smoke billowing over the city of Luhansk. The fumes were visible from a distance of tens of kilometers. Authorities said the blast damaged administrative buildings at a packaging factory and a factory that produces cleaning supplies. This attack was quite remarkable as it was the first attack using Storm Shadow missiles. On the other hand, these attacks are not the first case of the Ukrainian armed forces launching missile attacks on Russian infrastructure objects and positions. On June 2nd, the defense forces launched a massive missile attack on objects of critical importance to Russian troops in the occupied territory of Pryazovia. The Ukrainian army targeted the port of Berdyansk, which the invaders used as a logistics center to transport ammunition and other military goods by sea. On May 27th, a series of explosions were heard on the outskirts of Berdyansk, accompanied by the work of Russian air defense systems. According to preliminary information, the attack was carried out on rest centers in the village of Novopetrovka, near Berdyansk, where Russian troops were stationed. The recreation centers of Khimik and Vesna, located on the coast of the Sea of Azov, were hit. On the same day, powerful explosions were heard on the territory of the Azov cable plant in occupied Berdyansk. At the beginning of the video, we informed you that the counteroffensive of Ukraine has begun. However, Ukrainian authorities are determined to reject these allegations. Let's take a closer look at the developments on the front lines and get acquainted with the allegations about the attack. The collapse of the dam at Novokakhovka and subsequent flooding, which covered approximately 596 kilometers squared on both banks of the Dnipro River, caught the world's attention. Despite all the Kremlin's denials, this did not seem like a coincidence. The dam and the road across it offered a possible line of attack for Ukrainian forces seeking to destabilize the Russian forces. It seems highly probable that the Russian forces controlling the dam will decide to blow up one of Kiev's military operations off the table. Kiev has already expressed its interest in this part of the front line more than once. In late April, Ukrainian soldiers crossed the river and briefly established a bridgehead at Oleshki. Ukraine also took control of several small islands in the Dnipro Delta near Kherson. The extent of Kiev's military plans for this region is unknown. The devastating flood will have made river crossings impossible for the time being. The conflict continued further east and seemed to escalate as authorities in Kiev were suddenly plagued by flooding. The UK Ministry of Defense tweeted that heavy fighting continued in various sectors of the front. The Ministry of Defense added that in most regions, the initiative is in Ukraine. In a video released the same day, Russian Defense Minister Sergei Shoigu claimed that Russian forces repelled an overnight Ukrainian offensive involving 150 armored vehicles and 1,500 soldiers in the region south of Zaporizhia. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, Ukraine's 47th Mechanized Brigade attempted to break through the Russian lines. A Western-supplied Leopard tank is destroyed in a video circulating on the internet. However, these images have not been confirmed. Ukrainian officials, characteristically tight-lipped about current operations, offered provocative glimpses of what was going on. Deputy Defense Minister Anna Malia said that Russian troops are actively defending the area around the town of Orikhiv, about 65 kilometers southeast of Zaporizhia. The term active defense refers to a system of defensive actions in which the defender does not go beyond the general operational task and retains the initiative and freedom of action. The main task of such a defense is to exhaust large groups of enemies through active maneuvering of forces while detecting the direction of this attack. And Imalyar also confirmed on Telegram that clashes continue further east around Velika Novosilka. The two towns likely form the western and eastern flanks of a highly fortified section of the front line, which many analysts believe will eventually attempt to breach the Russian lines in Ukraine. Also, before the offensive began, the Ukrainian army actively struck Russian targets behind the Russians in the Zaporizhia region. Residents of Myrna Melitopol County reported a powerful explosion near a military unit captured by the Russians. Tokmak residents also reported at least 6 explosions. These settlements are located in the area of potential directions of movement of Ukrainian forces from the Orikhiv region that Malyar mentioned. In addition, the occupation authorities in the uncontrolled part of the Zaporizhia region announced the evacuation of Tokmak, Poloi, and Vasilivka. Evacuations will be carried out to occupied Crimean cities, including Sevastopol and Kerch. On the other hand, the southern front line is not the only area where the war is heating up. Images taken from the north and south of the city of Bakhmut, which witnessed one of the longest and fiercest battles of the war, showed that the Ukrainian forces were advancing. Malyar stated that they were advancing from 200 meters to 1,100 meters in various sections, which may eventually be an effort to besiege the city and trap the Russian troops. As the UK Ministry of Defense noted, Bakhmut painted a rather complex operational picture. But does this mean that the Ukrainian counteroffensive has already entered a dramatic new phase? Alexei Danilov, Secretary of the National Security and Defense Council of Ukraine, mocked the idea. Alexei Danilov stated that all this is not true and that when they start a counterattack, everyone will know about it. But something has definitely changed. The thing is, the front is finally moving. Many options are still open for Ukrainian commanders. However, Ukraine also operates under a number of important constraints, notably the lack of warplanes capable of providing air support. That is why the Ukrainian armed forces move slowly and then bring their air defense systems closer. Another factor is time. This attack will likely last no more than 5 months, after which the autumn rain will once again make the open areas impassable for heavily armored vehicles. So what will success look like if Ukrainian forces are able to pierce Russian lines as far as the Sea of Azov? Then any Russian soldier west of these breaches will suddenly become much more vulnerable and completely dependent on supply lines passing through the Crimean Peninsula. Finally, all that remains will be to destroy the Kerch Bridge connecting Russia and Crimea and attack the ships and planes used to transport supplies to the peninsula. But it will probably take months for that to happen. The most critical front line of the war between Ukraine and Russia still remains the city of Bakhmut. Due to the clashes that have been going on for over a year, the city has almost turned into ruins. In Bakhmut, where more than 70,000 people lived before the war, only the sound of guns and missiles are echoing now, while the sky of the city is covered with black smoke. The latest situation in Bakhmut, where perhaps millions of bullets, thousands of missiles, and many more military ammunition have been spent so far is quite critical. Both sides of the war are constantly trying to win the battle for Bakhmut. In this direction, we can see that the Ukrainian forces have taken the advantage in the city to a large extent with the successful attacks they have carried out in the last days, especially in recent days. Russia's attacks on the Donbas town of Bakhmut have almost stopped. British intelligence believes the situation in Bakhmut could worsen for Russia due to tensions between the Ministry of Defense and the Wagner Group, whose troops operate in the sector in question. Also, British intelligence reported that the Russian Federation sees Belarus's continued indirect support for the war against Ukraine as possibly an important political signal. But the Russians were unable to make any advance attempts in the region close to the border lines such as Bakhmut, Donetsk or Kharkiv, relying on support from the Belarusian front. On the contrary, Russian forces, especially in the last days, began to flee from the Bakhmut front lines. The reason for this was the heavy attacks of the Ukrainian armed forces on the front lines in and around Bakhmut. Recently, it was seen that a group of Ukrainian armored personnel carriers began to fully attack Russian positions in the hellish landscape in Bakhmut. Yes, Ukraine was starting to use the advantage it had in Bakhmut. Intriguing video of a Ukrainian contingent after M103s and Dutch-supplied WYPR 765 seconds deployed in an attack on Wagner PMC positions in Bakhmut. The video of this striking attack operation was watched millions of times on social media. The video had a very strong World War I vibe. In addition, in the video shared, they could clearly be seen how the Ukrainian forces hit the Russian military resources as a result of a successful shootings they carried out after disembarking from the armored personnel carriers. Other videos recorded in different aspects of Bakhmut showed a Ukrainian soldier briefly breaking through the Russian trenches to fire an RPG-7 at Russian positions, and a drone view of a failed Wagner PMC attack in the fog and gloom of Bakhmut battlefields. However, it will take more than advanced armored vehicles to break through the Russian lines because, as seen in recent battles, the side that cannot really encave the necessary support from armored vehicles, infantry, and other units usually suffers heavy losses in clashes on the front line. That is why the armed forces of Ukraine urgently need military support, because the current clashes continue not only in the city of Bakhmut, but on almost all front lines of the Donetsk region. But for the moment, since the Russians have withdrawn from Bakhmut, the offensive actions in this city have been alleviated somewhat. Ukrainian forces here continued to disperse from the north and south directions of Bakhmut and cleared the Russian forces around the city. Currently in the northwest of the city on the Kromov Highway, Ukrainian forces are conducting serious offensive actions against the Russians. The Ukrainians are constantly firing artillery here to stop the Russians and prevent them from providing support to Bakhmut for a long time. The Ukrainians made quite a lot of military efforts to take full control of the Kromov Highway. The current situation shows that these efforts of the Ukrainians are slowly yielding results. On the other hand, the struggle between both sides of the war continues. In the south of Bakhmut, on the highway between Bakhmut and Ivanitsky, the Russians began to send their additional military forces here to carry out attacks on the city. But the Ukrainians have built up a very solid defensive fortification in this area, as well as on the Kromov Highway on the northwest side of Bakhmut. For this reason, the Russians cannot pose a great danger on this highway, which provides the connection between Bakhmut and Ivanovsky, no matter how hard they try. When Russia's attempts to attack and blockade the city across Bakhmut were unsuccessful, all the Russian armed forces, after receiving heavy blows, diverted their attack routes to a surprise city 91 kilometers southwest of Bakhmut. The heavy Russian losses in Bakhmut were cited as the main reason for this tactical change of the Russians. Therefore, Russia has likely shifted its operational focus to Avdiivka, south of Bakhmut, and to the Kremenosvardov sector to the north. These are regions where Russia probably only wishes to stabilize its front line. This strategy of Russia showed a return to a more defensive operational design in general. It has been reported that the latest situation in Avdiivka at the moment is quite critical due to clashes between Ukrainian and Russian forces in the Kremenosvardov directions. The military preparations of the Russians continue while clashes continue fiercely through the Donbass region. It is estimated that Russia will make a move for a new siege attempt in the Ukrainian front line. Avdiivka, in line with the operational war design we have stated in the Ukrainian frontline town for about 10 years for Bakhmut, 50 kilometers south of the Razor Edge battle. Russian forces reportedly refocused their efforts on the fortified ruins of the city and airport of Avdiivka, just a few miles north of Donetsk. Critical data will set the course in the region, showing that the vast land to the west of the town, which has endured clashes in the immediate vicinity since the start of the Donbass War in 2014, may be vulnerable to an escape and rapid siege. Avdiivka may soon become the southern counterpart to Bakhmut siege. Clashes have increased in recent days, especially in the area near the town of Krasnohorivka in the north of the city. Russian airstrikes in the past few days targeted Avdiivka, causing partial collapse of a multi-story residence. Infrared video of the attack also recorded subsequent airstrikes on Ukrainian positions in the region. In addition to evidence of Russian efforts on Avdiivka, a recent video allegedly showing Russians mobilized from St. Petersburg in an under-equipped attack in the city. A critical attack by Russian army forces on a Ukrainian position in this area further escalated tensions in the settlement. Russia, on the other hand, does not need to completely encircle the town to turn its continued defense into a losing battle for Ukraine. This situation, in fact, poses a great danger to the Ukrainian forces because, much like the Western approaches to Bakhmut, the routes that Ukrainian troops rely on for reinforcements or escape at Avdiivka are unfortunately open, and these hubs may be vulnerable to Russian flank attacks. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, need to keep these areas under constant control and send additional military support for clashes in Avdiivka, using these connection roads. On the other hand, given the staggering costs of equipment and casualties on both sides' embankments, a second attack of a similar size would raise concerns about the attrition of the Russian army before Russia's impending counterattack. For this reason, it seems unlikely that the Russian forces will start a violent and unexpected clash in Avdiivka, just as in Bakhmut. But the Ukrainians will need to maintain reinforcement troops in Avdiivka and its environs just in case. Because the Russians carry out suicide attacks in and around Avdiivka, taking all military risks in the coming days. We'll be back with more news about what is happening in Bakhmut, Avdiivka, and other critical front lines of Ukraine. With the start of the expected massive Ukrainian counteroffensive, the Russian army lost the last month in less than 3 days. The Ukrainian army has already liberated 5 villages in the next region, demonstrating once again how well prepared and willing they are for the counterattack. Although the Ukrainian counterattack is currently aimed at the Donetsk and Zaporizhia regions, the main target of the Ukrainian army is Crimea. But the army still has a long way to go to enter the Crimea, and the Ukrainian partisans again stepped in when it was most needed to shorten this path. The partisans also dealt a heavy blow to the Australian remaining supply lines of the Russian army with a series of explosions. The railway lines in Crimea were attacked with explosives. The explosion occurred during the passage of a Russian freight train the other day. Preliminary information shows serious damage to the infrastructure of the railway line. Making a statement about the situation, the head of Crimea, Sergei Aksionov, appointed by the Kremlin, said that the train traffic in the section had stopped due to the incident. He confirmed that there was no loss of life as a result of the explosion, which was the only encouraging factor in the situation. Aksionov also explained the measures to be taken to minimize the impact of this incident on passengers. Taking into account the stoppage of train traffic, bus services were organized to ensure that passengers reached their destination safely and on time. In the Kirovsky district of Crimea, train traffic was suspended due to damage to the railway line. Estimated troubleshooting time was calculated as 3 to 4 weeks. This railway is one of the most important supply routes of the Russian army, and the fact that the railway is unusable for 3 to 4 weeks is a harbinger that the Russian army will be deprived of its arms and ammunition during this period. So who did the attack? Ukrainian partisans claimed responsibility for the attack. The partisans who said that the army is busy expelling the Russian troops from the territory of Ukraine also stated that they will announce more about the destruction of the Russian supply lines. Another attack this week came from the hands of Ukrainian partisans in the Russian-controlled settlement of Yakimivka in the Zaporizhia region. Partisans blew up the railway bridge used by the Russian army to supply weapons from the Crimea. A railway bridge was blown up in the temporarily Russian-controlled area by partisans from the city of Melitopol in the town of Yakimivka of the Zaporizhia region. According to an official from the Ukrainian armed forces who did not want to be named, it was noted that the bridge served as part of the Russian army's supply of arms and ammunition from the Crimea to the Russian-controlled part of Zaporizhia region. Prior to this, a series of explosions had occurred in the port of Berdyansk. A missile was seen flying over Berdyansk, but the type of rocket could not be determined due to distance, according to local officials. Then there was a big explosion on the port side, according to preliminary assessments. 3 Russian ships moored in Berdyansk harbor were damaged. In addition, 15 ship crews were out of the war as a result of this attack. Russian officials, after initial investigations, stated that they thought the attack was carried out with UK production Shadow Storm missiles. Russian officials' predictions appear to be correct given the location where the missile was fired and the altitude at which it was launched. Information about the attack was also confirmed and officially announced by officials appointed by Russia. There were 3 attacks in total, according to officials. All of them hit the city port. In addition, the Kremlin confirmed the losses in the initial determinations. Soldiers of the Ukrainian armed forces attacked Berdyansk around 12 o'clock yesterday. The city's manager, appointed by Russia, said the attacks were in the port area. According to preliminary information, 3 Russian ships were damaged, one of which was heavily damaged. The 15 personnel of the heavily damaged ship died during the attack. We estimate that the target of the Ukrainian army was directly the port itself. Our emergency service teams are still working, he said. Local residents published the moment of the attack in Berdyansk. The rockets crashed into the harbor as originally claimed, judging by the photos showing a massive column of smoke and dust rising. However, until now, there is no information about the exact target of the missiles. However, it is very likely that Russian Navy ships or the infrastructure of the Berdyansk port will become targets in the future. No official statement has yet been made about the functioning of Russian air defense systems in the region and the possible interception of Ukrainian missiles. But earlier in the week, the Russian army enforced a pause control as it entered and exited Berdyansk. The suspects were not taken into the city. This leads to the conclusion that the Russian army predicted a possible attack on Berdyansk but did not take any measures against it. So what is the purpose of Ukraine's attack on Berdyansk? Due to its location, Berdyansk is located in the middle of Melitopol and Mariupol. It is quite normal that the port, which has an important place, especially in the supply by sea, is targeted like all Russian supply routes. When the great counterattack of the Ukrainian army is approaching. In addition, this attack may have been carried out to support an attack on Mariupol and Melitopol, which were among the possible targets of the Ukrainian army. The shooting of 1 Navy and 2 dry cargo ships in the port of Berdyansk is of great importance for Ukraine to liberate these regions. It is very important that Mariupol and Melitopol regions are freed from Russian control for the successful conclusion of the Ukrainian counterattack, since these regions provide a direct passage to the Crimean Peninsula. The Ukrainian armies attacking the historical peninsula from both sides will make things even easier. Last fall, Russian officials stated that they were considering sabotaging attacks in the Russian-controlled areas of Ukraine and ensuring that the war was supported by the world public opinion of Russia. In recent days, Ukrainian authorities have also made statements to support this issue. Given the claims of Western analysts and past statements, the statements of Ukrainian officials are truly frightening. According to Ukrainian intelligence officials, Russian army engineers planted explosives at an industrial chemical plant near what has been described as a toxic acid lake reservoir in Crimea. Russian President Vladimir Putin's army has targeted Ukrainian settlements and infrastructure facilities throughout the war. This week, Ukraine accused the Kremlin of destroying a Soviet air dam at Novokakhovka in the Kherson region, which caused massive flooding and required the evacuation of thousands of civilians. Kremlin officials said Ukraine sabotaged the dam. Ukrainian military analysts talked about the Crimean Titan plant. The Russians reportedly said they could detonate the explosives planted at the factory in the Russian-controlled city of Armyansk if they feared that Ukrainian forces are ready to attack. Analysts on this news. The plant has already been completely emptied, including the vessels containing acid, chlorine, and reagents. Russian troops have recently started placing explosives there as they saw that the Ukrainian armed forces could cross the Dnipro River and attack Armyansk. To blow up the Crimean Titan would be of military interest to the Russians because chemical emissions would slow the movement of Ukrainian army, he said. Ukrainian officials also warned that explosives detonating on the Crimean Titan would release thousands of tons of toxic substances into the atmosphere, causing an event worse than Chernobyl. So what happens if this possibility comes true? If such an event occurs, the inhabitants of the Republic of Crimea and at least 7 Ukrainian regions will be affected, as well as Turkey and Russia itself along the Black Sea. Crimean Titan is said to be one of Eastern Europe's largest producers of titanium dioxide pigment, a chemical once used in paint, sunscreen, medicine, and food coloring. However, the use of titanium dioxide was banned as a food additive by the European Union last year for fears that it could be a carcinogenic. Ukrainian officials reported that the facility's potential to harm the environment is well documented, and that in 2018, local authorities evacuated 4,000 children from towns and villages near the facility due to toxic sulfur dioxide gas escaping from the toxic lake reservoir. Although these allegations are quite heavy, considering that Russia is on the verge of losing the Ukraine war, it is unfortunately quite possible for these actions to take place. Taking such an action and blaming it on the Ukrainian army, while the support of the Russian people for the Ukraine war is decreasing and Russia needs a war gain, is an action that Russia could take.